this morning? All right, we'll call the meeting, Health Committee meeting for March the 9th to order. Ms. Michael Ann, if you will, call roll.
Mr. Lee?
Here.
Mr. Oliver?
Here.
Ms. Hall?
Here.
Mr. Lovern?
Here.
Mr. Sorrells? Mr. Gray? Mr. Lipscomb? Mr. Kitchens? Mr. Marcus?
Here.
Mr. Mooney? Ms. Meadows? Mr. Stadhagen? Mr. Rafferty? Mr. Sales? Ms. Warren?
Okay, thank you. All right, I'm not sure why everybody's here today, but anyway, I have the first bill on the agenda, and I'm going to set the rules because of the same rules we've had, I guess, since I've been sitting in this chair, and then I'm going to turn it over to Vice Chair Oliver. But we have, how many? 6? We have 5 people that will be speaking, and we will hold it to 3 minutes. Michael Ann will time it, and I will tell you, and this is not for today, not because it's my bill, it's been this way since I've been here. At the end of 3 minutes, if you're in the middle of a sentence, it's going to be cut off. So you got your period. Doesn't matter if you're for it or against it. That's the rule. So just give you that, and Representative Mr. Chair Oliver, would you take over, please?
And Representative Lee, you want to bring your bill?
Yes. All right, I'll talk a few minutes, if I may, about the bill, and then I guess we have a public hearing today. And this is dealing with telehealth in the state of Alabama. We have seen tremendous strides in telehealth across the state, some by design, some due to desire. Representative Chairman Oliver, I see Representative Garrett in the back, and he has a bill. How about letting him go first without him having to endure this 20 or 30 minutes? And
that's fine. Do you want to take?
I'll take it over. Okay. We're ping-ponging up here. So, Representative Garrett, I saw you walk in. There's no need for you to sit through this.
Thanks, sir. Appreciate it.
And your bill is
H-
House Bill 447.
Right. Thank you so much. So this bill is actually a bill that we brought last year. I believe we passed it out of the committee last year. I can't remember. I'm coming out of my budget mindset, so I can't remember yesterday. But what this bill did was, I thought, good policy from last year. Remember last year during the COVID situation, we had a lot of bills that came up about dealing with health officers. And specifically, we have the Jefferson County Health Officer and Mobile County Health Officer are not under the same authority as a state health officer. That may not be the right way to say it, but they can do things apart from the state health officer. In a lot of the things that came up last year, there was concern that these county health officers, some people thought they were going rogue. Some people thought they were doing things that were apart from the state mission. I had a lot of conversations with the Jefferson County Health Officer and found out that actually they did consult with the state health officer on everything they did. There's a lot of dialogue there. As part of the Emergency Small Business Task Force to reopen the economy, we worked a lot with these health officers in both the county and in the state. But what I thought would be good policy, and at that time, and I haven't talked to them this year about it, but at that time, both health officers were in agreement that if we had a bill that just said that a county health officer cannot go beyond the order of a state health officer without that state health officer's written approval, that would do 2 things. One, it would give another set of eyes to a situation, because some counties might be different than the state. And again, here, really the 2 that would be affected by this bill would be Mobile and Jefferson. They would have different situations than maybe they would have elsewhere in the state. But that would be if the Jefferson County Health Officer wanted to do something that was beyond the state order, then he would have discussions and would formalize what I think they're already informally doing, and the state health officer would say, yes, I agree, or no, we don't want to do that. It would give a second set of eyes to a deal like that. It would say in the event you ever did have a rogue health officer that you've got a check and a balance there. But also I think to both of them, it gives a credibility to what they're doing. The state health officer can say, yes, I've looked at that situation. It's good. I support that effort. Or the county health officer can say, I have the backing and support of the state health officer. I thought it was good policy, and that's why I'm bringing the bill back.
Are there any questions?
Mr. Chairman, great bill. Move for a favorable report.
I have a motion. Do you have a question? Okay. Representative Warren?
Okay, I understood you to say that this bill would be inclusive of Jefferson and Mobile counties. They would have to follow this.
Right.
Is there a statute anyway that gives them this authority that you've addressed in this bill?
Yeah, right now, I'm sorry I don't have the maybe someone here can tell the specific statute, but both of those county health officers have additional authority or I won't say powers, but they have additional authority than what the other health officers have around the state. And this doesn't usurp that or clip that authority. It just means that if you do it, if it's specific to in this bill, it's specific to a state of emergency, that relates to the control of a pandemic or outbreak of a disease. It's that specific that this bill prohibit a county health officer during a state of emergency from issuing an order or directive that relates to the control of a pandemic or outbreak of a disease unless the state health officer provides written approval of the order or directive. So the state health officer has given an order, or if there's something needs to be done in that county that's health related, the state health officer is the check that says, I agree. And I think that is good
I'm just
policy.
making sure that Mobile and Jefferson County won't come up and say, you can't tell me what to do. I'm just making sure.
Honestly, when I had conversations with the Jefferson County Health Officer last year, and I believe he had spoken with Mobile last year, they were okay with this bill last year, and Dr. Harris's group was okay last year with this bill. There were a number of bills that came up that did a lot of other things. They actually would limit their authority. One bill would require that in Jefferson County you have a committee that basically had to vet everything, and we didn't do that. This just basically says the experts get
Thank you.
consultation and cover.
Any other questions?
Just a comment. I think what Representative Garrett said is very true. Jefferson County could still come with a local bill to put a committee together. This is really, I believe, something that we can count on to help people understand that the effort in our state would be made to be in solidarity and clear accountability to everyone in the state and not have anything happening that is sort of occurring on a different level. I mean, there were so many comments about the difficulties in Mobile and Jefferson County, but the county can still bring that committee, which I have heard they may do that. So,
All right, I have a motion by Representative Lovern, a second by Representative Mooney. All those in favor by giving a favorable report by saying aye. Those against, likewise. Bill passes with favorable
Thank you.
favorable report. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You did a good job yesterday on the floor, too. Representative Hall abstains. Okay, you want to pass it back to me, Representative Oliver?
And if you'd bring your bill.
Okay. Let me get back on track here. All right, in the past 18 months, 2 years, we have dealt with things as far as the pandemic has brought things out that we probably would have never expected, and then expedited some things, one being the telehealth, and many times broadband. And many times people talk about broadband and dealing with schools, and that is an issue with teaching and school and kids and staying home and those type things. But also there's a group of those with telehealth in the health business. And this has been brought to light and expanding. It's just growing and growing. And we have spent hundreds of millions of dollars, and there are going to be more millions of dollars that will be spent in the broadband area to help. I've used this example several times. My parents both lived to be close to 90 years old, and it seemed like they were going for a doctor's visit or checkup so regularly, and I'm the only child. I was the only one that had to do it. So my concern was, okay, they're going to fall and break a hip or do something. So I wish at that time I would have had the opportunity to use this. Today, telehealth is being done, but there are no guidelines. There is no foundation whatsoever in the state of Alabama. It's basically the wild, wild west. There are some concerns and has been some things that have happened. Some things that we're going to try to prevent. One is cold calls for people. Hey, I'm a physician or I work for so-and-so, just want to check on you. Do you have any health issues? Well, you do. Well, I'm going to have the doctor call you and do those things. That's an example of one thing we want to prevent and stop. Some of the things that this bill does, and I want to clarify a couple of things, but this bill allows, this is for MDs and DOs. That's where this bill falls into line. It allows DOs and MDs outside the state to practice in the state of Alabama, as long as they have a practicing license. It allows them to follow our guidelines in the state of Alabama with their medicine prescriptions. Opioids, a great example. There are some guidelines that are in place that we require physicians in place. The end goal with this bill is to make sure that those that are getting the attention or I should say speaking with a doctor or having some kind of treatment gets as good as it can be through telehealth as you do in face-to-face. That's the end goal here. A couple of things I do want to bring out, that there will be some clarifying language that will be brought. Let me get my bill so I have it. Committee members, on page 8, you've probably been talked to about this. Page 8, we're not prepared to do this today, but I will tell you if, and you'll just have to take my word for it, we will have language that clarifies this, or I will not carry it. But if you'll see there, line 18, and I've got a commitment that it's going to happen. A physician who provides telehealth medicine service to a patient 4 or more times per year should have at least one in-person visit with a patient every 12 months. We're trying to clarify that. That means that what it's saying is you can actually do telehealth medicine with a doc 12, 15 times a year. I don't know. It doesn't matter how many. But within that 12-month period, or maybe even the next 12-month period, the 13th month, that's the language we're trying to work out, they will have to have a face-to-face visit with a doc. The question that I have, okay, and one of the things that we're working on with psychiatrists, that, you know, they usually see the same doctor. I think it's appropriate, good medicine is to see the same doctor. And when that happens, and they're a long distance away and can't go and see them, how are we going to work that out? Do they refer someone to that? We're going to work through that and fix that language to make sure that that's taken care of. No additional fees, no requirements for doctors other than they do have to have be a physician, licensed physician. I guess, are there any questions before we have the public hearing yes, ma'am.
Was there any thought or consideration to nurse practitioners or PAs being able to do telemedicine?
No, this is only for MDs and DOs. And one day it may, but somewhere we have to find a starting point since there are none today. All right, Mr.
No more questions. We'll start the public hearing. Will you call the first one?
Nico Corley.
Morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Nico Corley with the Medical Association. I don't know that I can add a tremendous amount to what Chairman Lee already added, but I'll give you just some information kind of as the production of this took place and how we did this. So this bill pulls telehealth into the mainstream. It has for a long time kind of been set aside as another tool that can be used. This actually will put it into the toolbox and adopt it as a mainstream acceptable form of providing and supplementing medical care. And that's a key thing that this bill articulates, is that this is a supplement to existing in-person medical care. And that's a key issue, because some types of care can be well provided in a virtual fashion. But to have that be the only manner of providing care is problematic. You've got to lay eyes and got to lay hands on a patient periodically. And that's a key thing that this bill articulates. So as well, it also sets up a framework for how this would move forward. It leaves rulemaking authority to the medical board, which already licenses physicians, and allows them to make exceptions for certain circumstances, whether it's certain specialties or certain types of care models that would need to be kind of brought in and adjusted to some effect. That would allow them to do that as well. It also, very importantly, as Chairman Lee said, it also ensures that for fraud and abuse prevention purposes, that patients initiate care, right? I mean, right now, we get calls for car warranties, right? The next thing could very well be, how's your back? You know, a cold call, how's your back? Do you have back pain? That's something we want to prevent, you know? That's not what takes place now with in-person care. We want to make sure that transfers as well as virtual care is provided. We are meeting, as Chairman Lee said, with other groups that have kind of come forward, some even just before the committee meeting, with some issues and concerns they have. We're trying to work on different pieces of language that would address their concerns. It's rare, and I'll mention this before I close or offer opportunity to answer any questions, that you've got the providers of medical care, my membership, physicians across the state, the largest payer of medical care, the insurance company, Blue Cross, and you've got the regulator of care, the medical board, all coming together and saying we need to do something to make sure that patient care that's provided virtually is quality care, that we don't have problems where people are providing substandard care, and that people are able to get the care they need, whether they're in rural areas or what have you. So this bill attempts to do that. There's no perfect bill, but we are working to address the concerns of different groups that have come forward, and to try and make that something that everybody can support, because we do think this is a framework we need, because we have nothing in place in Alabama now, and we're in the extreme minority of states that have no kind of framework for what's appropriate and what's not. So I would answer any questions if the committee members have those, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Hall?
Thank you. Are you able to tell me, if you look at this bill and look at what other states are doing presently, what you present, what does that look like when we look at Georgia or Tennessee or?
Sure. So I think we're late to the party in Alabama. There were some states that put telehealth legislation in place really long before the technology was in place, you know, in the early 2000s or mid 2000s. So we're late to the party, but I think we're also able to kind of learn from some of those dynamics. We are, with some of the concerns that some of our entities that have worked with us on this so far, trying to address different pieces, whether it's visit types and how that can be done. We're trying to look at what other states are doing. We feel like this is really a pretty open bill. It's agnostic as to technology. It's agnostic as to platforms. It allows, you know, for HIPAA compliant, that's important. And different pieces of that, you know, the different practices would be able to decide which methodology they use. But we would set a framework that says, you know, at some time and place, an in-person visit's important, and that the standards that are applied there would be the same for in-person, and that there would be no, again, as I said, cold calling, or they would be required for patient initiation.
And those code callings, do we have record? Do we have any way of recording or getting a record of those kind of calls and what the results have been as they were reported? I mean, do we have doctors here in the state of Alabama that are making those kinds of calls?
I would say no. I think that, and again, anecdotally from the conversations we've had with different carriers and with different regulators, that we feel like that is taking place. Certainly, like perhaps in the durable medical equipment field and with some of the compounded medications, that is taking place in some formats. And again, there's no framework to police that in Alabama. That's my understanding anecdotally.
Okay, I was just trying to determine how you get that information. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Marcus?
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Corley, this may not be a question for you, but I'll go ahead and ask. Under this bill, if a physician prescribed a controlled substance, can they do that via the telemedicine, or does the patient have to be there in person to get a controlled substance?
So the legislation speaks to that in a couple of different ways. So first and foremost, if the physician or no one in the group has ever seen the patient, then outside an extenuating emergency circumstance, there would be no allowance for controlled substances. And the reason there is we've just kind of come out of an opioid epidemic, and the data shows we're definitely on the downhill side. We don't want that to take place. Now, we don't want this to be another avenue, right? An opioid epidemic via Skype. We don't want that. So if someone in that group, that physician group, has seen that patient and prescribed controlled substances in I think the previous 12 months is what the legislation says. I don't have it in front of me, but then it would be allowed. That would be allowed.
Okay, so as long as they have a physician and seen a physician after that, they can get controlled substances if it's a mental health issue or something like that.
Yes, sir.
A physician can prescribe it.
Like a reauthorization
Yeah,
of prescription.
right.
Yes, sir. It just
Okay.
can't be that the initial encounter with no
Unless
background.
it's an
in the group.
emergency.
Yes, sir.
Okay, yes, sir.
That
Thank you.
says that it's drafted now, yes, sir. And
If-
Mr. Hart will follow me, and if I'm incorrect in any of that, he'll certainly correct me. Yes, sir.
If there are no more questions for Mr. Corley, call the next speaker, please.
Thank you.
Claudia Tucker.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Claudia Duck Tucker, and I'm the Senior Vice President of Government Affairs for Teladoc Health. You all don't know me, and I don't know you, and it's unfortunate that we've got such a big issue before us with such little time, and I haven't had a chance to meet all of y'all. I found out about the bill Friday, and as you all know, it has moved very quickly. So since Friday, I've had to get some folks here to help me, try to talk to as many of the members as I could, talk to the people at Blue Cross Blue Shield and at the Medical Association and others. 90% of this bill is great. It is really, really good. It would make Alabama stand out in the country. The other 10% is not good, and it will set access to care to all of Alabama residents backwards, and it doesn't have to. I'm a telehealth policy expert. I help legislatures in all 50 states. We are active in all 50 states. I know this stuff pretty well. The bone of contention is, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for saying that you were going to address this, is a mandate on how many virtual visits you can have, and then you have to seek virtual care. Any number, if it's outside of the standard of care, and that's the thing about telemedicine, is the standard of care rules. That is king. If a physician who's licensed in Alabama feels like he or she can meet the standard of care using virtual care, the consult progresses. If they think that the person needs to be seen in person, then they have a legal and a moral obligation to say, this cannot go forward, you need to be seen in person. Our docs, we have in Alabama 250 docs. My docs are your docs. 150 of those are Alabama residents. The rest of them may live outside the state, but all of my docs are regulated by the Board of Medical Examiners, every single one of them. They do something wrong, your board takes their license. They also have to report it to the other states, so their license are in jeopardy there. So it's a very, very high bar. But the 3 visits, 5 visits, how many visits, it's a mandatory, not clinically reviewed, not substantiated by medical evidence number. If a person needs to be seen in person, then the physician will do that. The standard of care, for those of you all who are not in this world all the time, is what a prudent physician would do in a similar situation. That's the standard of care. Psychiatry, and Mr. Chairman, you said that you were also going to address psychiatry, had an issue with that because these people need to see the same psychiatrist day in, day out. And not to do that is just cruel, and we all know that there's a mental health crisis. There's a shortage of physicians in Alabama, as you all well know. And somebody asked the question, where does this put Alabama with the rest of the states? You will be the only state that has this requirement. The only state. Right now, you all rank 45th.
Time.
See,
Are-
did good. Mid-sentence.
Are there any questions? Ms. Meadows?
Sorry.
So what do other states do in terms of, is there any limit in the other states to how many visits someone can have?
It's standard of care. Standard of care. So, for example, if you're a diabetic, you're obviously going to need to be seen in person. If you've got cardiovascular disease, you're going to need to be seen in person. If you're like me, I live out in way rural Virginia, healthy as a horse, but I do get poison ivy, pink eye, and other things. And, virtual care is there for me. And so if I get poison ivy 5 times, well, on the 6th time, do I need to drive an hour to go see my doctor?
So when you say standard of care, the standard of care would be different for a psychiatrist seeing a patient. I mean, so a psychiatrist might be 12 visits a year. I mean, is that what you're saying? It could be different for every patient, for every type of doctor?
No, right now I'm
Every
talking for gen
diagnosis.
med, okay? I think that the standard of care should prevail.
So in other states, there's no
That's the
limit?
way
Is
it
that what
works.
you're saying?
That's the way it works. Yes, ma'am. Everything hinges on the standard of care, the professional discretion of the physician. And as an aside, I agree with your comment about the nurse practitioners.
Okay, thank you.
All right, let's, no more questions. Let's go to the next speaker.
I believe it's Mercer May.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, thank you so much for having me today. My name is Mercer May. I'm here on behalf of the American Telemedicine Association. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. I think we are one of the groups that was mentioned as coming late to the game, and I would like to thank everybody for including us in those conversations this morning. I think they were productive, and I hope that we can find a reasonable compromise. I would also echo everything that Ms. Tucker has had to say, and I agree with all of that. The issue here truly is the standard of care. Everything hinges on the standard of care. So if a provider needs to see a patient in person, then that's exactly what will happen. But there are myriad of examples where a provider simply does not need to see a patient in person in order to meet the standard of care, whether that be one time or whether that be 12 times, depending on what the issue is. In fact, psychiatry and behavioral health is a perfect example of that. There's actually a lot of studies coming out right now that deal with how effective telemedicine has been in the issue of behavioral health. A lot of folks find it a much better experience to be able to text their physician or text their psychiatrist or talk to their psychiatrist over the phone and not have the stigma of going to that person or that provider in person. So that's just one example. Dermatology is another great example. And I think there is a solution here. And if I may be so bold to offer it, on page 8, as the chair had alluded to, subsection F, and then right above that, the preceding paragraph 4, it talks about the board allowing exceptions to the 12-month requirement. I would suggest that the better way to approach it would be to kind of flip it on its head and to start broad and to allow telehealth as long as it meets the standard of care, and then give the board the authority to choose scenarios or to find scenarios that are clinically substantiated to begin narrowing that. So, for instance, cardiology is a great example. Diabetes is a great example. There's tons that definitely require an in-person encounter, and I think the board would be the appropriate agency to determine when and what conditions are necessary that require such an in-person encounter. And then one other thing that hasn't been touched on yet, and I'll just try to briefly do that, it's the prescription language that can be found, I think, on page 9. And to be clear, this language as written right now would actually be more restrictive than what the federal government does. The federal government looks at this through the Ryan-Haidt Act. And what the Ryan-Haidt Act says is that, and this is all pre-pandemic, the pandemic has given a lot of waivers to that, so it's not as enforceable, but once those public health emergencies go away, the Ryan-Haidt Act will come back. And what it says is that in order to prescribe a controlled substance, you have to have an in-person encounter with a medical person. That doesn't necessarily mean a physician. So what you'll see in rural health clinics a lot is...
Tom.
I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you so much.
Questions for Mr. Hart?
I've got one.
Sir.
Mr. Moody?
First, let me say that, First, let me say that I use telehealth. I'm a cancer survivor from prostate cancer, and my Kirkland Clinic physician and I find difficulty in scheduling appointments for the process of looking at and responding to me about the blood results that are tested periodically. So we use it, and I'm totally in favor of it. There's everything that it says about why to do it is great stuff. I mean, not only that, we just spent a large sum of money in broadband access and availability to make, I hope people will understand the importance of that for this very issue, to provide rural areas an ability to get medical treatment. Some questions that come up, and possibly, I mean, there'll be other people addressing us, so maybe someone else can answer them or whatever. First, I'd say this. I'd like to commend Blue Cross and the Medical Association in relation to what they've done during the pandemic to allow telemedicine to occur, because we've had no problem. It's been seamless. It's been a cost that was absorbed and not passed on to patients. So we need to be thankful for that. But the questions come in the sense of, I've read this and I don't know that I quite understand it. I know my physicians. I may pick up the phone and call a physician about my grandson. I might pick up the phone and call my son about his opinion on something that's going on in the family. I may call my physician. I mean, we go to church together. We work on committees together. We do everything under the sun. What constitutes the counting of a contact when I'm saying to a very dear friend who's done surgery on me before, to, what are your thoughts on this? What do you really think about this? What's the pluses, the minuses? What's the whatever? And he may not even be the person who's going to be seeing me for something. I'm trying to understand the total effects of this process. Second opinions come to mind. Having medical related understandings in my family from a practicing board certified and fellowshipped cardiologist. Second opinions, that process coming in, calling back to talk with the doctor on, who gave the first opinion, so forth and so on. How many for your industry, and I don't know if you're associated with Teladoc, I was thinking about it when the nice lady was up, but how many, what is the number that you would think, or what is it in other states that they're doing that would be the number of actual contacts that you would be proposing to occur within a year? And then I guess going even further, obviously we don't have specific guidelines for this in our state at this point in time written out, but it would appear to me to be that if you are a osteopathic physician or a physician and you're licensed, that whatever the laws of this state are should govern you totally in that process of practicing telemedicine in a reference sense to what those laws are by the law. Are we expanding, or
We have an amendment coming for that,
Okay,
Representative.
that's perfect then. That's the type stuff that I've gotten questions about. I guess the last thing is just thanking you that you're going to deal with that question about mental health services. I work a lot with the Owens House in Shelby County, which has got a fancy legal name. I can't remember. It's Shelby County something, but it serves counseling with young people. It's extremely important right now because of the increase in number and quantities of visits that are occurring with young people and things that have been problems through the COVID pandemic and all. That opportunity there, though most of those people are counseling under the guidance of a physician. Is this going to affect that process? And that's very concerning because we are short-handed and short-funded in that area. And I'm sure there may be some others that come up. Those are not questions to be positive, questions to be negative. Those are just questions. I'm full of questions. Everybody in this group knows I'm full of questions. So I apologize.
We do, and do I need to take over the chairman's seat here again so we can move on, Representative?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
All right, and Mr. Marcus.
You said something about the way the language is for the controlled substances is even more restricted than the federal government. What do you mean by that?
Thank you, because that's where I got cut off mid-sentence. So I would love to explain that a little bit more. So in the federal government, what they allow, they require that you have an in-person relationship. So basically, you had to have created the relationship in person in order to prescribe controlled substances. But what they allow for rural health clinics particularly is you can go to a rural health clinic and there might be a medical auxiliary there. So let's say a nurse practitioner or somebody who is licensed but is not a physician. And then the nurse practitioner essentially will telehealth consult in the physician, or the prescriber. The nurse practitioner will telehealth in the prescriber. The way that this is currently written is on page 9, it says, A prescription for a controlled substance may only be issued as a result of a telehealth medical service if the physician or another physician in the same practice within the 12 months has had that in-person encounter. So it actually requires the physician themselves to have the in-person relationship, which, as we know, can be very difficult for folks in rural
So
areas.
what you're saying is you would like it to see a nurse practitioner added to this?
Or medical auxiliary generally. I think that's what would get it up to the federal level. I think for me personally, I would say, again, it hinges on the standard of care. There's many controlled substances that can be prescribed via telehealth that perfectly meet the standard of care. I think opioids is probably not one of those, to be perfectly clear. But substance abuse disorder drugs like buprenorphine would be an excellent example of somebody who's trying to kick an opioid habit, who is only able to see a provider via telehealth. I mean, we've seen great success with those types of encounters and those types of prescriptions over the past couple of years. Does that answer your question, sir? Very good. Sure. And I can try to answer the other gentleman's questions, but I don't know if that was.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah, could we go to the next speaker if there are no more questions?
Mindy Hannon.
Good morning. I'm Mindy Hannon. I am the president and CEO of the Alabama Restaurant and Hospitality Association. We offer a teledoc plan through the National Restaurant Association to our members, to the employers and the employees. Some employers will buy this plan for their employees. A lot of people use it for different reasons. A lot of our people are part-time and they do not qualify for a health insurance plan, and so they'll buy this instead. A lot of times also we actually offer a Blue Cross health insurance plan to our members, but the cheapest policy is $400. So a lot of people, just depending on their circumstances, may or may not take advantage of the health insurance, but this is a product that they can take advantage of for a very limited cost. And so our issue or concern with this bill is the number of times that somebody can access it. Because if they don't have health insurance, requiring them to go to an in-person visit is often financially not viable for them. So instead, they just won't have health care. And this has been a great product for us to be able to offer to our members and their employees, because it provides them with health care where they were not getting any health care previously. And instead, they were overutilizing emergency rooms when things became a very difficult problem. So I know you said that this would be addressed, and so we appreciate that.
well, if I may, Mr. Chairman, I have 200 employees myself. We provide this for our employees, and they use it. It's a great tool. Very same situation. I would never put them in jeopardy of not providing them the care that at the best price for what they can afford as well. And I'll talk a little bit more about it
Thank you.
in a few minutes.
Are there any questions? We'll call the next speaker.
Matt Hart.
Morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak before you today on this bill. I'm Matt Hart. I'm an attorney with the Board of Medical Examiners. Want to take a couple points to hit on that Chairman Lee and Nico have already hit on, but what the Board of Medical Examiners sees as a regulator as being the key aspects of this bill, and what is very important to us is one that it officially recognizes telehealth as an acceptable and appropriate modality of healthcare in this state. That's something that we've never done before. We've seen the growth of it and the utilization of it over the last couple of years, and see it as a great tool to expand access to care. So it's an opportunity for you all to officially sanction that in this state. Number two, it establishes a framework for an acceptable structure of telehealth, which includes clarifying that patients who utilize telehealth services can expect that same standard of care that they would be getting in an in-person visit. That as a regulator, we feel that is very important, that whether you see a physician in their office or pick up the phone, that physician owes that same duty of care to you, no matter the modality. It also allows the Board of Medical Examiners the ability to promulgate rules to fill in the blanks of this regulatory framework, and to also adapt as telehealth is an evolving modality, an evolving practice. The board has the ability to adapt and amend regulations to meet those needs as it continues to grow. And third, as was mentioned, the law addresses specific provisions to curtail fraud, waste, and abuse in the practice of telehealth. That's something very important to us as the regulators. I know it's important to the payers so that they can continue to offer telehealth. A lot of discussion today has been made on the four visit provision. Our view at the Board of Medical Examiners is that this requirement encourages simply the good practice of medicine. If a patient is seeing a physician more than 4 times a year for an issue, it is only good medicine, in our opinion, that that physician needs to see them, put hands on them, run their test, do what they need to do in an in-person setting at least once a year. The second aspect we see on this is that it promotes good clinicians. What we don't want to see in allowing and recognizing telehealth are physicians who spend all day in their living room in front of a TV or a computer and never change out of their pajamas and see patients all day. That does not, we don't believe that that leads to good clinicians. Clinicians also, for themselves and to keep themselves competent, need to keep their hands, see patients in person. So we will recognize that as well. Now also,
Time.
Are there any questions? Seeing no, Ms. Hall?
I don't know, it might have just been being alert at that point. Tell me would you make that comment again about the preventing the doctors to sit in their house all day with pajamas on and?
right.
Patient, not the doctor.
Well, I mean, just,
No, the physician
No, he
is,
said
as
physician.
well, Chairman Lee. That the two provisions we see of this 4-time as a regulator, we see it a little different. One, it's for the good medicine for the doctor to see the patient. And the second aspect is for the physicians. To us, a good clinician should see patients on a regular basis, physically see patients. Telehealth is a tool, but it should not be their primary practice where, we don't feel that your skills will be keen enough if you go years without ever physically seeing a patient in person.
And so based on what you said, based on the conversation we heard earlier as we talk about standard of care, I mean, everything that I've heard at this point, we talked about standard of care determining that versus your idea that somebody's just lazily addressing the issue. That was how it came across.
Yes, and we're from the regulator perspective, so I think we look at it a little differently in that we protect patients and we regulate physicians. So we want to make sure that all of our physicians are competent and good clinicians in treating patients, and we feel that seeing patients in person is important for a physician to stay keen.
All right, if there are no more questions, Mr. Mooney?
Yes, sir. On page 10, and you're an attorney with the Board of Medical Examiners, so you're
Yes, sir.
probably the right person to ask this of. I feel like you probably got a more intimate knowledge of this bill than I do, where it talks about the Board of Medical Examiners and the Medical Licensure Commission may adopt rules regulating the provision of telehealth medical services by physicians in the state, even if the rules displace competition. Could you elucidate that for me?
Yes, sir. That goes back to, and I'm sure y'all have heard this from other regulatory boards, the North Carolina Dental Board case, I think from 2016, where that board was sued, went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said that the board members could be held, personally liable for any anti-competitive actions. One of the provisions that the Supreme Court said in order for the agencies to maintain their state immunity is that they have to have specific articulation from the legislature. This is language that LSA has used in other regulatory bills. We have a provision, as most regulatory boards, I think in 2017, had a kind of a sweeping act added to their practice acts that have similar language to this that allow for that and to give them protection under that case.
Is this the area that would keep people from setting up a process of calling to try and solicit a patient to be served by a specific doctor who might be I don't know what the correct terms are to call it, but as our chairman was saying, which I would agree with, I don't want to see people calling trying to churn up patients and so forth. But I'm wondering, is that the section under which that comes, or I guess,
No, sir.
help me understand, even if the rules displace competition, if there's a health-related aspect to that.
Exactly. Yes, sir. No, that does not cover that. That is on page 7 in subparagraph D. And it requires that a telehealth visit can be either patient-initiated or based on a referral from a patient's already treating provider.
That certainly makes sense. The competition aspect of it, though, I mean, is there some specific thing beyond the North Carolina case that drives the concept that we would not always support free market competition?
No, sir. Again, that language is strictly from the Supreme Court case to give protection to the state and to the board. You know, I think it's fairly standard.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
If there are no more questions, would Mr. Lee like to address the amendment?
Yes. Well, a couple of comments, if I may.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Did want to mention, and Ms. Hannon, very valid question, and as far as your employees, and I've been there, and I would like to add that most cases, you know, unless it's like a psychiatrist, but most cases when you call, you may not get the same doctor. So that does not go toward the times, whatever number it lands on. Because I think there were 250, I forget how many doctors that were involved just in the state, and you multiply that by 200 or 300, 200, I have no idea, but well, let's just multiply it by 50 with 50 states. So there are multiple opportunities for multiple times for doctors. So the chances of that repeating that same doctor are slim to none. And if it's something that is serious enough you want to see the same doctor about more than 4, 5, 6 times, whatever we land on, there is a valid reason that you probably, good medicine would say, and I'm not a physician, but if it were my child or my wife, I would say you need to see a doctor in person, or an employee. So that's a valid question. I've been on this committee, I guess, about 12 years, and we may have, but I've never seen providers, the payers, and the regulators come together and try to work something out to move something that is, there are no, and Ms. Hall, you've been here, that we have no regulations, no guidelines whatsoever. And I'm not so sure it's not a bad idea that we may be the only state in the nation that does it a little different, because I think our health care in the state of Alabama is very good. There is an amendment, a friendly amendment, and I would say that we do have plans to address some items that are coming. I did not want to stop this bill because we have a short time between now and the end of the session, and I'm going to work through some of the issues that's been brought up and address those on the floor.
A motion for Mr. Kitchens on the amendment.
Yeah, and you should have the amendment in your packet. Basically, what this amendment does is it just says anyone operating in the state of Alabama must follow the laws here in the state of Alabama to address Representative Mooney's concern earlier.
All right, Mr. Marcus.
I make a motion that we accept the
Here's the amendment, it's on page 6.
Page 6 after line 25.
Ms. Hall, you want us to hold up here for a second? You're okay?
I got it.
Okay, second?
Who's the first motion now?
Mr. Marcus?
Okay.
Mr. Sarles? All in favor say aye. Aye. All right, the amendment or all opposed say no. Amendment passes, and we're back on the bill.
I would ask for those that are working, Mr. Chairman, that will be working on this, that I've been reminded by Ms. Hall, let's try not to bring a substitute. Let's address each item with a amendment and get it in my hand as quickly as we can, because I would like to get this moving so we can have some accomplishment by the end of the session.
All right, do I have a motion? Mr. Kitchens? Mr. Marcus?
As amended.
As amended. All in favor say aye. All opposed say no.
I'm abstaining until I get the bill.
And the bill passes.
All right, thank you everyone for coming.
And I signed on the bill. I mean, I'm a
Yeah. We're gonna, you're gonna be